welcome back to the Silent Plus podcast. My name is Josh Watford, and across from the table on the right of me,
that would be John Nicholson's here.
John Nicholson, and to the left of me,
Casey Dunaway.
Right.
Casey Dunaway. We got the expert called in for today.
That's right.
Not even.
Casey, the in-house biblical theologian that we have.
So far from it.
Yeah. Well,
headed that way, though. Because
Hopefully.
we're all theologians. All that means is we think about God. That's all that really means.
Yeah. That's right.
So you're a theologian.
Yeah.
You
Everybody
think about
listening to this are theologians.
That's exactly
as
right.
well. I think everybody who even doesn't believe in God is a theologian. Everybody has thoughts about God.
Okay, we're down a rabbit hole.
Okay.
There we go.
Speaking about God, Haggai spoke about God.
He did because God spoke to him.
That's right. That's right. And so Haggai it feels different, right? Why does it feel different when we open the book to Haggai and we start reading and it feels like a different book? Why does it feel different than most of the other ones that we've come across so far?
Not a lot of poetry.
He's pretty straight up, isn't he?
Yeah. There's and even his prophetic words are really brief.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole lot more narrative, descriptive. Let's place this in a particular place and time, which I think is an important, wonderful insight. But yeah, it has a very different feel. Just reading it, looking at it on the page, it looks different. It feels different.
Well, and we are entering into a different time in biblical history.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about that, John. Where are we?
All right.
Or when are we?
Yeah. Up to this point in the 12, we've been prophesying to the northern kingdom, which falls to Assyria. And after it falls, we're prophesying to the southern kingdom, which ultimately falls to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And we're past that now. After we leave Zephaniah, we are now exile in Babylon, and we've returned.
Yep.
So we're 70 years, 80 years down the road here when we come to Haggai. The people have endured that. And just to kind of put it in biblical context, Daniel's had his experience in a lion's den.
Yep.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and that fourth individual have been in the fiery furnace. All those things have happened over in Babylon, but now we're back in Jerusalem after the exile.
Yeah. So turn back to Ezekiel and Daniel to learn about what was going on during the exile, but then flip back to Haggai because we get Haggai and Zechariah are contemporaries, meaning they're prophesying at the same time. So the next couple weeks we're going to be talking about what's going on when they first get back to the land.
Right.
And you would think that they learned all their lessons over in exile, right?
We would hope so.
You would think so,
but
they
not so
didn't. I know there's many times when I send my kid to timeout, and then they get out of timeout, and they go and do the exact same thing they did that put them in timeout in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas it's not a perfect analogy, it's very similar to what's going on here.
Right.
So they still needed prophets. They still needed words from the Lord in order to get stuff right.
Yeah.
But yeah, Haggai, he's got one primary purpose.
Yep.
One primary issue that he's speaking into. So talk to us about that, John.
He's all about we need to get the temple of the Lord built because the people have gotten back and they're going about their lives. And we're probably 15 years in at this point, second year of Darius. We can kind of pinpoint this because it was during Cyrus's reign when they come back. With Zerubbabel and that sort of thing. So the folks have been back a while, and he even says in here in the book that you've got your nice houses and they're paneled. Even you're not just living in a little shanty town anymore. You're building some nice places to live. Yet the Lord doesn't. You've not rebuilt the house of the Lord. And so this is the heartbeat that's there, and it's not so much about I don't think about some physical structure for the Lord to be in. It's about how are the people honoring God in their life.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the issue that Paul speaks of in Acts when he says that our God does not live in temples made by human hands.
Right.
Okay, so in what sense? Why is this such a big deal? I guess that's my question.
And that's the important question that we do need to grapple with, and in our pre-show preparation time. One of the things that can come out of, and you stated that Haggai can be taken to be a prosperity-oriented gospel, that if we just do A, B, and C, if we put, coin of obedience A into slot B, then God blesses us with overabundance and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
That is not how to read Haggai. What's going on here is that the people have decided that they're going to live, and they were trying to honor God, sort of, but not fully. They were trying to live life on their terms and have God kind of in the background. Yeah, we believe God. Yeah, we love God. And this is our story as well.
Yeah.
And I think this is the bridge for us. It's because a lot of folks want to live with God. They want to say they love God, but they want to live lives on their own terms.
So, Casey, you're telling me that, because you've been talking this whole time, right? You're telling me that if I don't come to church work day, this coming Saturday, by the way.
There we go. No pressure.
And I don't give my tithes, then the Lord's not going to give me a good life.
Exactly.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Not at all.
No, but see, the people did have a good life. And that was part of the problem. He says here...
Yeah, they're in paneled houses.
Oh, they're in paneled houses. In verse 6, it says, and this is chapter 1, it says, you've sown much, but harvested little. You eat, but you don't have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourself, but no one's warm. The one that earns wages does so to put them in a bag with holes. It's not that they had lack. They had a lack of satisfaction. They had enough to sow. They were sowing a lot, they were out there. But the harvest wasn't what they anticipated. And this reads so much like modern day America. Folks have got huge abundance, all kinds of wealth. We've got everything we quote unquote need, but we still find ourselves, there's something else that's missing. And what is it? And Haggai says, well, the thing is missing is you haven't placed the Lord in the place that he should be in your lives. And that's what's causing all this discontent in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so we got to do a little bit of crossing the cultures, right?
We do.
So we got to talk about, particularly, I see it as a covenantal issue, right? So under the Mosaic covenant,
he's reaching back to Deuteronomy chapter 28 with the curses.
Right, and this is how they were to relate with their God. And this is how God related with them, through the mediation of the priests in the temple. And tabernacle to begin with, and then the temple once Solomon got on board. And so for them to still be under that new covenant, because let's be honest, I think, now this is just me kind of reading between lines, I think that they thought that when they got back from the exile, God would enact a new covenant with the people.
Yeah, they're still looking for this Messiah figure.
That the Spirit would come on all flesh, that the law would be written on their hearts, not on stone tablets anymore, that he would cause them, like Ezekiel talks about in Ezekiel 36, that he would cause them to walk in his ways and be careful to keep his laws, and that there would be a new age, right? Mm-hmm. And then they get back, and that's just not the case. The temple's in total disrepair, and the Spirit's not come. They're still struggling. I think about Nehemiah. I think the books of Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah, are one of the strongest cases for the need of a new covenant that the Jewish people had. Yeah. At the end of Nehemiah, after they went into exile and come back, and Ezra's tried to do everything that he did, he caused everybody to have divorces and all this kind of stuff. At the end, Nehemiah's like, Lord, I've done what I could.
That's right.
Please remember me for good. Yeah. And this is after he's beat people up and pulled out their hair and all that kind of stuff, because people were not obeying the law.
Right.
And so there's this, that's the looming issue that I see over all this. How is God relating to his people, and how are they going to relate to him?
Yeah, and I think it's that second one that is the heartbeat of Haggai.
Yeah.
Is how are they relating to God? Because God's made it plain. His covenant is a one-way covenant. I'm going to do this. My love is steadfast. It is unchanging.
That's right.
But what are you doing in response to this? And this is what Haggai is calling the people out on, is they'd become pretty satisfied. I mean, they're back. Life's good. We're not in exile anymore. We're all right. We came through that, and no, the temple's not rebuilt, but we're all right.
Yeah.
But they were finding holes in their pockets, and there's just no satisfaction in that life. And why is that? Because they're not honoring God. They haven't placed God in that preeminent. Well, it's not preeminent. It's in that central part of our life. God is not going to be peripheral to our life. Is really
without a doubt
what's coming through here.
All right. So speaking of Haggai's prophecies, let's talk about a couple of them.
Okay.
All right.
There's not many.
No,
there's not a lot.
There's not many.
Of the Lord here.
It's
pretty small.
One of the ones that I gravitate toward is right there at the beginning of chapter 2. All right. So here's the issue with the temple. Right. He's prophesying about that. He's telling Zerubbabel and Joshua to be strong. But then he says in verse 7, this is chapter 2, verse 7, "And I will shake all nations so that the treasures of all nations shall come in. And I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts." Now, we believe, and as well as Jewish people from all the way back time of Deuteronomy on forward, that in order to be a prophet, what you say has to come true.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In order to be declared a true prophet, what you predict has to come true. Now, there's multiple ways to talk about this passage. One of them being that there will still be a future temple be built. And so people look at Ezekiel 40 through 48 and say that's the new millennium temple that will be built on the Temple Mount over in Jerusalem at some point in the near future. Other people say that this was Herod's temple that was completed around the time of Jesus' lifetime. I mean, what do you do with this, John? If he said all nations will bring all their treasures into the temple, and that it's going to be a better temple than even Solomon's temple, I mean, what do you do with that?
Yeah, and this is part of the conflict or part of the tension that's here is that when they do begin to obey, because they do. We get the timeline here. This is really a compact little timeline that we're dealing with in Haggai. And when Haggai first calls them, and they say, okay, yeah, let's get busy about this, and they do, but they start rebuilding it, and some of the old heads around are saying, boy, we remember the one that was torn down, and man, what we're building doesn't even hold a candle to this. And so here God is saying, but there's coming a day that this other temple will be built that's going to be really beyond your imagination. And I think this is some of the now but not yet tension that we have.
Yep.
And I've talked about it with our Sunday school class. I've utilized the illustration of driving into Colorado Springs from the east, and you see Pikes Peak, and you see the range of the Rocky Mountains, and it looks from a distance they're all one piece. But you get there and you discover that Pikes Peak sits out from the front range of the Rocky Mountains.
Right.
And this is kind of what's happening, I think, here in Haggai, is that there is this moment where they are rebuilding this temple, and it fulfills that calling of God, but the ultimate fulfillment is still yet to come. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That makes sense?
I think so. Yeah.
You've heard me use that illustration several times over the last several months there in our Sunday school class. But yeah, so I think that the ultimate fulfillment of this is yet to be seen, in my opinion. And there are others, folks that will have different views on that, and that's fine. I really love, and let me just kind of hijack this conversation for a second, because the way this begins back in chapter 1, the first prophecy says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts," this in chapter 1, verse 2, "These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the house of the Lord." When is the time to obey God, Casey?
Every day.
Yeah.
Trick question?
Yeah. I mean, really.
Now.
Yeah, now is the time, and this is where these people are.
Yep.
They have made this conscious choice they know that this is something they should do. In fact, that's part of the reason they were sent back out of exile. This was part of their purpose in coming out of exile. But they've chosen to take care of their own needs and kind of begin living their own lives, and they've kind of gotten into this satisfied pattern. This is all right. This is kind of how we're going to live, and God hadn't thrown any lightning bolts from heaven, so it must be okay with him too. And God says, when are you going to put me in that central position of your life? When are you really going to come and say, I, as your Lord, am of utmost importance in your life, rather than just another thing that you add to your life? I think this is really that central question that begins to arise out of this. And and the people, to their credit, they do respond. But as they respond in obedience, they do. There's this moment of, man, we remember what used to be. And man, we hear that all the time. How great Marion used to be, or how, Siloam back in the glory days, and those kinds of things. But God here in this prophecy is saying, don't worry so much about the past. Think about where I'm taking you. Mm-hmm. But even in the midst of the building, they're saying, what good is this? We feel like we're inadequate even here in the midst of this. And God is saying, but I am with you. And this is one of the repeated themes from Haggai, that God is reminding his people that he is with them, and that his spirit, I love it there in verse 5 of chapter 2, where he says, my spirit remains in your midst. I am still with you. You haven't stepped up to the plate, and you may feel like this is futile and this is unimportant, but I'm still here with you. So don't be afraid.
Yeah, it says back in verse 14 of chapter 1, and the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel and Joshua. And so just a reminder that even they couldn't have been doing what they were doing if the Lord wasn't with them.
Right. And this is the power of the proclaimed word of God. Haggai obediently proclaims, here's God's word. How much longer? When are you going to say the time is?
Yep.
And they say, okay, we'll respond to that. That's right. God uses his word to stir up the spirit of the people, energizes them for his work, and then even when they feel a little discouraged about it, God says, listen, what you're doing now has more significance than you can understand at the moment.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I think you're ready to preach this.
Well, it's only been 2 weeks since I've been able to preach, so that's been part of this.
You've had plenty of time to prepare.
Right, yeah, exactly. But yeah, there is this ongoing tension in this conversation. The one thing that I'm struggling with, and I still don't have an answer with this, is at the end of Haggai, where he talks about Zerubbabel being his signet, almost as if he gives him messianic overtones in some ways, but we know that he's not the Messiah. But I do think it's a reaffirmation of looking towards Christ, towards Messiah. But so there are some things that are still troublesome, but I really do think that in many ways Haggai's message to these people in this particular time is the bridge being built to our own day, because we see the same sort of thing in our world. People having all kinds of pursuits and still being empty at the end of the day, looking for something else. And I think Haggai is addressing that in people's lives, and the reason being is because they haven't put the Lord where he belongs in their lives.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got distracted by looking at Zechariah.
Hey, that's next week, man.
But Zechariah deals with some of that you're talking about there at the end of Zerubbabel being chosen. Yeah, just the name Zerubbabel. I really tried to talk Becca into naming one of our kids Zerubbabel. That's such a cool name. I love that name. But then she was like,
"It's too big of a mouthful."
Yeah. But then he was like, it's not a Jewish name, and I can't remember exactly what it means, but it's not something that is awesome. Right. So I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, so him as the signet ring, I doing some prep work reading for this, people debate over everything. They debate over this end, like, what does it mean that he's about to overthrow the thrones of kingdoms?
Yeah.
And on that day, God will choose Zerubbabel as the signet ring. And, some people say, like, well, Haggai just got it wrong. Like, it wasn't about to happen. I tend to, when especially when you're reading Zechariah, here's where I'm getting at. I see both Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest, as these types of Jesus.
Well, and also remember, Zerubbabel is in the lineage of Jesus in Matthew.
Yeah.
So we're on that path. Here.
Because he in Zechariah 3 again. I keep going to Zechariah because there's something still very similar to what he's doing at the end of Haggai in Zechariah 3, where Joshua the high priest is taken to heaven, basically. And God takes his filthy garments away and gives him clean garments.
Right.
And then he has all this to say to him, and particularly in verse 3, it says, "Hear now, Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who sit before you, for they are men who are a sign. Behold, I will bring my servant the branch. For behold, on the stone that I have set before Joshua, on a single stone with 7 eyes, I will engrave its inscription." So on and so forth. And it removed the iniquity of this land on a single day. So he's talking to Joshua about he and his men are signs of something that's coming.
Yeah, preview of coming attractions.
Right. And so I think that applies here.
Yeah.
All that to say, I think that what Zechariah was doing in chapter 3, I think applies here in Haggai 2, that, yeah, there is coming a day.
Yeah.
And there is a signet ring on how. So I think about the seals in Revelation, right? That's what the signet ring did. It impressed upon those wax seals of the king's message. And then when you get to Revelation 5, there's only one who can open up the seals of God's redemption history. And it's the one who has the signet ring can do that. Jesus. Yeah. Right? So, anyways, that was a long way around to get to where we're trying to go. But, anyways, yeah, you're about to say something.
No, but I think that's such a part of reading the minor prophets. And you and I were having this conversation earlier, Casey, about how vital it is for us to grab hold of these Old Testament threads, because they give us clarity when we come to those New Testament moments where we see, oh, this is where it comes from. And you've been having a little bit of that experience. You said you've been reading Hebrews and seeing how these things fit.
Yeah, Hebrews has some of the most Old Testament relations. Just reading through it, you see how much Old Testament it speaks of, and if you don't have any knowledge of that, you have no idea what it's talking about.
And then reading it from the other side, reading it from Haggai's side, and as we talked about early, we wanted to look for, as Roger called them, the Easter eggs, those pictures of Jesus that are being placed here for us, and we get them even here in Haggai. Yeah. This promise of a temple and this promise of being made holy and all of these kinds of things. So, it's reading it both ways. As we're reading the Old Testament, we're looking forward to what has already been fulfilled, but then also as we're reading those New Testament writers, we read with that understanding. They're looking back and saying, I see it.
It was fulfilled, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great thing. All right, Josh, I've got to ask you about this because I know this has been much on your mind with your doctoral thesis. But what do you think about this in chapter 2, verse 11, where he says, "Ask the priest about the law. If someone carries holy meat in the fold of his garment and touches the fold of bread or stew or wine or oil or any kind of food, does it become holy?" And the priest answered and said, "No." What about this?
John, we're 24 minutes into this thing. I was going to try not to go here. But, yeah, so if someone carries holy meat in the fold of his garment and touches with the fold bread or stew or wine or oil or any kind of food, does it become holy? The issue is no. Or the question, the answer, the answer that they give is no. And so there's this whole issue of contagious holiness in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that it's not just holiness that's contagious, it's defilement that's contagious.
Because that's the very next thing,
right?
Is that someone who's unclean,
that's where he goes.
Do become unclean.
All right, so the analogy that Haggai is giving is that even though, so he goes on, let me just read that in verse 14. So it is with this people and with this nation before me, and so with every work of their hands, what they offer there is unclean. And then he keeps on going. And so for us to fully understand this, we would need to be living in a world where holy, clean, unclean, and defiled are categories in our minds, and they're just not categories in our modern minds. But to be holy was to be something that represented God's character in some way. To be defiled is to be unusable for God's purposes. And to be clean and unclean are
I got to
just
take
kind of
issue
the
because
end
we do have those categories.
Okay.
You crack open that carton of milk that's been in your refrigerator a little bit too long.
Yeah.
You know it's unholy.
But we don't really have theological
we don't
grounding.
necessarily.
We don't have theological grounding for that, and that's how they saw the world. Everything was in those particular types of categories. But his prophecy is saying, look, everything that you touch, even though you're God's people, you're making things unclean. Even though you're set apart, you go back to Exodus 19, you're a holy nation set apart for my purposes, a people called by my name, a special treasured possession. By your actions, you're defiling everything. You're defiling my temple, you're defiling the city, you're defiling everything that you touch. So there's the holiness. Even though they're holy, they're still not able to do what they're supposed to do. So
here in these few minutes, we've gone literally at least from Exodus, and we've touched into Revelation, all in order to grab hold of what Haggai is saying.
Oh yeah, and Casey brings up Hebrews. Well, Hebrews quotes Haggai.
We've covered the waterfront here, and I just say this because Casey, you're on this journey. Tell us real quickly. You've got an ambitious task that you have set for yourself.
I'm trying to read through the Bible in 40 days. And the minor prophets inspired that because it jumps all over the place. A bunch of the minor prophets go back to 2 Kings, and now we're talking Ezekiel. So understanding that, reading through it in such a short amount of time gives me a better understanding and an overview of what it's saying in one big lump sum, how it all relates together.
So what do you say to somebody who doesn't have the wherewithal? Because I'm not sure I could pull the 40 days off. I've done the 90-day thing.
I'm not promising you I can either.
But what would you say to somebody that maybe is willing to put in some time, but how do you begin to access the understanding that even Haggai's people that were pretty satisfied with their relationship with God, but they still had a framework? How do we get this framework?
Keep reading, keep studying. And in a sense of community like this, you learn off of each other. I don't know half of what y'all are talking about.
Neither do we.
But being a part of this conversation helps me to understand it better.
Yeah.
So I think community helps, but staying in it. If you just read it one time, you're not going to grasp it because you don't know where it comes from. You don't know where it's going. You don't see the prophecy fulfilled. You don't see all of the things that you'll get if you read it all. And you're not going to get that without community either. Somebody to keep you accountable and to push you to continue reading and studying and doing it on your own.
Yeah.
You don't have that.
Yeah, and to call us to account when we step out of line, because sometimes Josh says, "No, hey John, you need to think about this right here," or we have those moments where we are sharpening each other, and this is one of those moments I think where Haggai, looking around and seeing people who were, if you will, spiritual, they were faithful people. They had gone through the discipline of exile. They had returned faithfully, but they had stopped short. They were, I think the writer of Hebrews puts it, they were being drifted by. God had more for them, and God was going to do it, but he would rather do it with them on board rather than do it apart from them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is this opportunity, and thankfully the people do respond. And God says, and there at the end of that prophecy we were just talking about with the unclean and clean thing, God uses this wonderful contrast of when you started, here's how this was, but now you have begun to obey, and I'm blessing you. And I think this is where we come to. And another one of the challenges, and I'll talk about this a little bit on Sunday, is I think a lot of people want to say, okay, God, if you bless me, then I'll obey you. And that's not how God works at any time in Scripture. He's always asking us to obey Him, to trust Him, and then out of that trust, we begin to experience His presence, His blessing, and His work in our lives and through us. And it's like you, Casey, reading intentionally. You may not be having these great spiritual mountaintop high kind of moments, but you are putting in work that God is going to bless. And it may be right now. I'm sure there is blessing in that moment, but certainly you can look forward to additional blessing as you further comprehend what He's up to in your life.
And it's almost like an intimate relationship that we are building upon. It's like the marriage that's referred to. You can see the strength over time as you continue to study and read, how it grows stronger, and it develops that deep, intimate relationship, that deep bond that you don't have if you don't do the work.
That's right. That's exactly right. And this is what the Lord is looking for, is a people who want to enter into that. You know, it's Him desiring people to come to Him, to desire Him, even as He desires them. And again, I think, and Josh, I continue to commend you for putting this on my radar, to read these as one, because we've come to this part of the story where that aspect in the people's hearts still really hasn't changed.
Yep.
From Hosea right up to now, there is an acknowledgement of God. You're great, you're mighty, yeah, we should awe you and fear you, but I've got other pursuits I'm going to get after. And here in Haggai, we've been through the discipline of exile and all that. We've come back. We've been able to build houses. We're okay. We got a job. Life's all right. We're rocking along. But we know there's something missing.
Yeah.
And what is that? Well, God says, it's me.
It's Him.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. All right, well, I'm going to show up to church work day on Saturday.
Yeah, you be sure you do that, so you can be blessed by God.
Yeah.
Make sure your checkbook's good.
Yeah, because I want a new car. So. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right.
Speaking of heresy, but anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I got.
It's good stuff, Casey. Thanks for helping us out.
Yeah. All right. Well, next is Zechariah.
For sure, and then we're also going to have a conversation with Roger, and look forward to that as he helps us.
That's right. We will have a special edition
section
of Siloam Plus, and it will feature Roger Harper about teaching the minor prophets to kids.
That's so good. I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. So most of it will be recollection of Sunday school, but I think it will have some encouragements for us to finish strong.
No doubt.
Well.
No doubt. Thanks a lot, folks.